Today is February 20th, 2022. My name's Renata Domatti, and this is my sister Erika Shadburne, and we're here to tell the story of our mother, Eva Domatti, a Swiss-American woman.
Tell me how she got to America, or where she was born, and what do you hear from her of the early days?
So Mom was born in Basel, Switzerland in 1938. And she was raised in a really urban sort of city setting. Her parents were academics, surrounded by intellectuals, that kind of an upbringing. And she became a nurse and worked as a nurse for how long? There.
Several years as her early career, and when she was young she always loved animals, but she never ever had any. Her parents didn't have any pets. Right. And so she, as a child, I always remember her telling the story, her first pet was a dead rat that she had found, and she put it in a box and she took care of it and until her parents found it. And of course they got furious, and that was the end of that, and the rat went in the trash. But that was
she dressed the rat, right? She made like a little bed for the rat, and yeah,
sewed a blanket and everything. And then in later years, she her grandparents had a Great Pyrenees, and she spent all of her time as a little girl when she would stay with her grandparents with this Great Pyrenees, and they went everywhere together. And she loved that dog.
Was it a Great Pyrenees or a Bernese Mountain Dog?
Great Pyrenees.
Great Pyrenees. Okay.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
yeah, and then she had a boyfriend who she then married, who lived close by in the neighborhood, named Chris Poppelbaum, and he was very, very smart and became a physicist, and they got married, and then they came, and Mom helped put him through graduate school with her nursing career and that kind of thing, and then he got an invitation to come to Rice University to teach at Rice University. And so that's what brought her originally to the U.S., is that she and Chris came here.
and so about what year was that she came to America?
That was about 1964-ish, is when she came, and he was a nuclear physicist that did research and taught at Rice University, and she came over on one of the early cruise, which you would consider, I guess, like a cruise ship, what we would consider today as a cruise ship, one of the very early ones, and they came together with their belongings and then spent about 2 years in Houston. And unfortunately then her husband at the time, Chris, got sick with hepatitis and passed away. So Mom was left in the United States, didn't know how to write a check, didn't know how to, could barely speak English, didn't know how to drive a car, didn't know how to do anything. And she had an apartment and a life, and she wasn't really sure what to do. And at around the same time that her husband passed away, her father also passed away in Switzerland. And so she ultimately made the decision to move back to Switzerland to be with her family. And in the process, she had to sell her furniture. So she contacted some girlfriends of hers and said, if anybody wants anything, let me know. So one of her girlfriends came over to the apartment with this gentleman, which was this woman's boyfriend at the time, and he bought quite a bit of her furniture. And
really nice, mid-century modern, like
yeah, really cool,
nice, a lot of teak wood and stuff like that.
Today we'd consider very cool furniture. So he bought quite a bit of her furniture.
Yeah, and so bought the furniture, and then Mom went to Switzerland, and this gentleman who bought her furniture, his name was John, and he reached out to her, and they wrote letters back and forth a little bit, thanking her for the furniture first, but then, you know, starting to have more conversations, and then he said he was taking a trip to Europe and wanted to come visit her, and he had a whole itinerary of places he was going to go, and he came to Switzerland and to Basel and never went anywhere else on his itinerary.
It was a conference. It was he was He was also a nuclear physicist. So that's, I guess, big part of the story. He was also a nuclear physicist. And it was a conference he was going to come to. And so he wrote and said, would I be able to hang out with you? You know, would you show me around a little bit? He never made it to the conference.
Yeah, and just hung out with Mom, and then they started dating. And he came back to the States, and then Mom decided to also, go back to Houston and continue dating. And so that became our father. They got married and then had us. So the joke was always that Mom married Dad to get her furniture back.
And we still have some of that furniture.
Yes,
I have it. Yes, we still have some of that furniture.
She did get it back.
Right. And so what happened next? What was the driving things in Houston that Eva enjoyed?
Well, Mom, when they first got married, they lived in kind of closer into town in Houston, and they decided that they had me, and you were born by then too when we moved to Simonton. And so they had the two of us, and they wanted to raise their children out in the country, further out, away from city life.
Better schools, it was the thought process behind it all.
And they were kind of, the way they raised us was very Waldorf-esque. Mom had been raised in a Waldorf, setting. And so it was like no TV, no Disney, no cartoon character type things. They wanted everything for children to have naturally generated imaginative play and not, this prescriptive stuff that is given to you. And so being in the country, of course, lent itself to that and fit in nicely. So they moved to Simonton, which is about 50 miles west of Houston, and bought, how many acres?
Yeah, it was about 5 acres, and Mom had raised dachshunds prior to that. So she raised and
That's right.
showed dachshunds, and so it seemed like, yeah, let's move out to the country and do this with our kids, and this will be a great life for them to grow up. So we move out there. She has those dachshunds, and then gets some other animals. She does Arabian horses for a little bit, and then she decides pygmy goats for a little while, and she becomes, through the process, a wildlife specialist. And so what that meant is people that abandoned hawk or owl or
A squirrel that fell from a tree or
possum or anything else would come to Mom. People would trawl and drop it off, and she would raise it and then release it back in the wild again. And so we did all of this. She started all of this, and then got known for it. And we had baby possums, baby squirrels, baby raccoons. We had a nutria at one point. We had a baby alligator. Yeah, we had a couple of deer once upon a time. She decided emus at one point.
peacocks.
Horrible
peacocks.
Anything you could imagine. She had raptors. She had hawks and
Rabbits.
owls in the back in cages that she was rehabilitating, or some that were injured too bad they couldn't be. So then this resulted in her having to start raising rats because she had to feed them.
Yeah.
And then she decided to get a couple snakes because she was already raising rats, so why not? And so this whole evolution just grew and grew and grew on this land. And I remember as a kid, the rats, and you couldn't give them to the snakes or the birds alive because they would injure the animals. So she would take them and just throw them on the cement and kill them, and then put them out there for whatever animal. And she would take,
we're still in here.
She would take the babies, because she needed those for the animals too. She would take the babies and put them in a Ziploc bag alive, because it was the most humane way to do it, and just put them in the freezer. So our freezer in the kitchen, you'd go to get your ice cream and you open the door and you're like, what in the world? Little baby rats in the freezer. We had all kinds of animals.
She'd pick up road killer. Remember that? If there was something dead on the roadside, she'd pick that up because that was food for the other animals, raptors and stuff.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
So with this amazing story, how did the llamas come into the picture?
The zoo reached out. So Mom really got known as a talented wildlife rehabber, an animal person in the area. And the zoo reached out and said, because Mom had lots of vet interactions with people, so Texas A&M, some local vets when they needed help. And these are, exotics. These are different kinds of animals, and so specialty vets. Well, these vets often worked with the zoo too. So I think that's how that connection happened. And the zoo needed help with a llama that wasn't good with people. And so they needed to find a home for this llama. Reached out to Mom, and Mom was like, well, okay, we'll try it.
Sure.
So brought the first llama, and then that was it. She fell in love. They really are graceful, beautiful creatures. And once she had one, you know, at the end of her llama career, she had close to 100. So it, you know, took on a life of its own.
Right.
Yeah, and so she started breeding llamas and going to llama shows and
conventions, and got very much involved in that community, and that turned into trips to Peru, where she would go to the high Andes, and then she would take other people on tours to Peru
and pack with the animals.
And then you know, people would sometimes buy some animals and bring them back to the United States. Anyway, all of that, she very much got involved and had a real passion for it, and had got other people involved. So when you saw other people starting to get more llamas, and that sort of grew as a thing, that people started enjoying llamas, it was, especially in the area, part of that was her.
And it was the 80s. People weren't doing exotics in the same way, you know, that they do now. And then parallel to that journey was the wildlife rehabbing, and the fact that there were, like Renata said, a whole group of animals that couldn't be rehabbed back into the wild. So we had a rabbit, a possum, dog, we had
3 or 4 raccoons.
Yeah, none of those could be into the wild. And so what Mom would do is put them in the trailer and drive to schools, set up times at schools, at senior homes, at hospitals, and visit with people as sort of animal therapy before animal therapy was a thing. And so we grew up, you know, going to all these places and watching the joy that these animals brought to people.
So, Eva seemed to be a very curious person. How did that happen, and what were some of her adventures?
Yeah, Mom was always so curious, and I think in part it started with her upbringing, being raised by intellectuals, academics who, her father was a writer and a journalist, and being raised in that environment, I think, was the seed of that curiosity, and her family encouraged that for sure. And then also she partnered with her first husband, second husband, Craig, always with very curious people. You know, you could see in who she chose to surround herself with. And then the fact with the animals that she was always open and interested in learning about new, different animals. One of the best stories is if you go back to her and Chris, when they first were together, they were just on their own time studying Mayan history and culture, that kind of thing. And then and that was kind of an unusual thing at the time. There weren't too many people studying it in the 60s like that. And then they came here to the US, and when Chris passed away, Mom decided to go to Mexico and visit some of the Mayan ruins. And that was very unusual at the time. There weren't roads leading to these ruins. She went by herself as a woman in her 20s and flew to Mexico, but then had to take a private plane into, which one did she go see? Was it Chichen Itza?
I think it was Chichen Itza,
Yeah. So she had a private pilot fly her to Chichen Itza close by, drop her off, and said, I'll pick you up at, 5 p.m. or whatever, just left her there for the day.
Or sometime, and it was not an airport, it was not an organized thing,
No.
it was not, she just gave him some money and fingers crossed he came back, and she really didn't know if that was gonna happen, and luckily he did.
Yeah, she said she told this story all the time of walking to the ruins and being alone for the day, and there was a monkey in the trees that had a baby, and that baby came down, and Mom said she held that baby and walked to the ruins, and the mom just wasn't upset about it at all, just followed her along, because it was before people were really going out there to those ruins. So I mean, that is just such a great example, of her curiosity, I think.
And what about the llamas? It seems strange she's in Houston with llamas and she goes to Peru and so on and so forth, selling?
Selling,
buying.
researching. I mean, she was just so interested in the culture and the community and llamas as more than just a beautiful creature on her farm, but as a cultural resource for Peru.
And it's food, and it's very different there than it is for us in the United States, where you have a llama and you're showing it, you're breeding it, and you're selling it. I mean, she did all of those things and did it very well and became very well known. But she wanted to know more, and these were desolate areas in Peru. These were not, she wasn't staying in lavish hotels and things like that. And she later led groups to Peru to do the same thing, other people that had the same interest. And by the time, at the end of her llama career, I guess she had 90 animals.
Yep.
And was living in the mountains of Colorado by herself and right near Pikes Peak and Woodland Park. And she had bought a house and managed them and took care of them all on her own. Until I think she hit about maybe 64, somewhere in there, 62, 64. And she just decided, too much. The altitude, everything, this is too much for me. I need to stop. And so, but she would drive back and forth from early periods of this. She would keep the animals in Houston in the winter and then drive them to Colorado in the summer. And she would go back and forth 10, 11, 15 times in a year with a huge trailer and a huge truck by herself and truck these animals. And then she eventually moved there for a few years and then at that point said, it's enough, it's getting to be too much.
So how did this rich environment create your careers?
Well, for I think both of us, I'm a teacher and Renata's a social worker, medical social worker. And I think for both of us that Mom's core of being a nurse and caring for others presented itself in all these different ways through animals and still caring for people and caring for animals. For me, going to these schools, with her, with the animals that could not be put back into the wild, going to these schools and visiting students and visiting seniors, visiting hospitals. That was the first time we went to teach Rogers in Houston, and they have a deaf program there, and it was the first time I saw deaf students and was intrigued. And another point to Mom's curiosity, I was like, that's so fascinating. They're using sign language. What is that? I don't understand. And I was maybe, 12, 13? Yeah. And on the way home, because we lived an hour from the school, she stopped off at a bookstore and handed me some money because she couldn't leave the animals in the trailer. So she said, you go in. She said, go buy a book on sign language. Let's learn this. Let's learn what it's about. And I mean, it just fostering that curiosity. So I did that, and that started me on a journey, and I ended up being a teacher of the deaf for 25 years,
Yeah, and I think not much different for me in that we saw she has a nurse in talking her stories in Switzerland when she was a nurse, and then when she came to the US and working for a gynecologist, obstetrician for many years, and seeing that and the animals and that desire to give, to help. For her, she did it people and then later animals. And so for me, it was people, and I wanted to do that. And for me, it was healthcare. As a child, when I was young, I had bone cancer, and my parents, mostly Mom, navigated all of this with me at MD Anderson because we lived in Houston. So for 3 years, she took me to all my appointments, stayed with me in the hospital, went through chemotherapy and everything with me, and supported me emotionally during that time period. And that also played a part in me going into healthcare. But that heart, that sense of giving was Mom. That was Mom, for sure, no doubt.
Great. How did we move from Pikes Peak to Georgetown, Texas?
So when Mom was in Colorado with 90 plus animals, llamas, and managing them, taking care of them, the land, at a certain point in her mid-60s, she decided this is getting to be too much. The altitude, everything is getting to be too much. So she said, I'm going to come back to Houston. Houston is my home. It's 2 of her husbands. She had lived there for so many years. So she got a townhouse in Houston.
Which was a big different. I mean, how
Yes.
many acres did she have in Colorado?
Oh, 80 or something
So
like that.
80 acres, and she lived in an Indian hogan.
Yeah.
So it was a round Indian hogan wood log cabin that she had completely renovated herself, 80 acres, and then moves to Houston, Montrose area to live in a
Downtown.
townhouse. So
Yeah.
that was a huge
She
life
did,
shift.
she did. And then she decided she wanted to get her GED. She had had her degrees in Switzerland, but they didn't necessarily translate here. So she decided at that age, I'm going to learn how to use a computer, and I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to get my GED. And she did, and she got a medical assistant license. And so she did that for a while. And then over time, Erika, who lived in California, got married and decided they were going to move back to Texas, but to Austin, which is where Erika went to college. I had gone to college in Austin. And so at that point, she moved back. And then a couple of years later, I said, I'd like to go back to Austin. And so I ended up moving here. Of course, our father had died several years, 10 years prior by that point probably. And then after a couple of years, we said, Mom, would you consider this? And so she came to Austin, and we looked at some places, some houses, and then we took her to Sun City.
Yeah. Yep. And drove around, and it was new at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sun City was pretty new. And she found a lot that she really liked. And it was a beautiful lot that backed up on the greenbelt, and you could see the deer and the turkey. And she didn't have all the exotics anymore, but she created a little oasis for herself right there where she still could see, all of the animals.
Yeah, so within 3 days, she made a decision, bought the house, and started the process of having it built in Sun City, in Georgetown. And yeah, it was a beautiful lot with trees and everything, so she got a little bit of nature, but still could be close to us.
Yeah.
And so that's how we got her to Sun City for quite a while, actually.
And she was a travel agent. So she was also working as a travel agent at the time so that she could, I don't know if she ever booked to travel for anybody, but it was a great way for her to travel and to
The world.
She went all over the world, everywhere from Antarctica, Bhutan, yeah,
Tibet, anywhere, China, Lebanon,
Galapagos Island.
anywhere she could go, she went and took me, Erika. We went on some family trips too, but she loved it. And then through that process comes number 3.
Right.
So we had Chris Poppelbaum, John Domatti, our father, and then Mr. Craig Kintzel is number 3.
The only one to survive.
The only one that lived through it all.
So I think that's a magical story too, because that's early computer dating. Is that right, Craig?
Yes, well, see, I was the lightweight in here. I'm only an aeronautical engineer, and I had to compete with these physicists that went before me and laid all the groundwork. But it was 2009. I had been divorced for 4 or 5, 6 years, and Eva had been widowed for coming on 20 years. And unbeknownst to each other, we were both trial and error in the social media online dating world, and had a few flameouts and such. But on one particular site, we connected. I tell this story that she winked at me, and they have a little thing there you can click on, and I winked back. Now, she tells it the opposite way, but she's not here to defend herself today. But after that wink, we sent a couple emails on that site, and right away I figured out she was European. Some of the subjects and the predicates and the verbs were rearranged in a different order in the sentences than what I was used to. And since I'd had a couple flameouts, I decided to take this really slow and easy. So I convinced her that my email was very unreliable there. Let's get off this site and get over to our personal emails. She bought that little story, and so we started emailing each other, and then we never spoke. I also said, my phone's not reliable, this and that, let's just continue. So literally for 90 days, we emailed morning and night, which then precluded Erika from using the computer in the mom's
I could
office.
not figure out why all of a sudden I was banned from the computer.
She was very secretive about this one. And online dating, she didn't tell us anything.
Overnight. I got banned. Yeah, it's like, whoa.
So eventually, and then her Swiss family came to visit, her niece and husband and essentially her grandchildren. Came over the Christmas holidays, and so that prolonged it. And so I think it was something like February of 2010 that, and she didn't invite me to Austin, so we'll meet in Houston. So she drove to Houston, and I flew. So we went and had our first dinner in Houston, and then things progressed from there. And so I was living back in Florida, and I had 3 children and 2 stepchildren, and I had 7 grandchildren and a great-grandchild on the way. So I decided to introduce Eva around, and I'm a retired pilot with American Airlines, so I had free travel privileges, and travel was Eva's hot button. So I figured out how to get her passes along with me, and so buddy passes or whatever they call it. And so we started out making the circuit, and she got to meet all my children and grandchildren over the next few months, and she really delighted and connected well with them. And so something like the 4th of July weekend of 2010, I picked up and moved in with her in Sun City, and we began our journey together. And again, travel was such a thing for both of us, and so she had an amazing number of Hilton points on her honor system, and I had this amazing little pass in my pocket. So we had airline travel and Hilton hotels wherever we went, and so we made pretty good use of it. In my back office, I can look at the my flight travels and so on with American Airlines, and we averaged 80 flight segments per year
That's
Wow.
incredible.
for about a decade.
Yeah.
And they would just call us one morning. Mom would call, Shotzi, we decided it's too cold here in Georgetown, so Craig and I are going to go to Palm Springs or Palm Desert or wherever warmer. And they would just wake up and go, and we were always so envious and thought, that's so amazing. What a way to do it, as much as they both loved travel, to just like that.
I have a friend in San Francisco that's a little older than I am, and it came up to be his 80th birthday, and his kids were having a big party for him in San Francisco. So I thought, well, it'd be really cool if and Eva had met him, we'd visited a number of times, and if we just surprised him at that party. So the idea was, well, we'll fly into San Francisco. Well, we got out to the airport, and the flights were full. Oh, well, that's not a problem. I got it in my back office. There's flights to Los Angeles. Let's just fly to Los Angeles, and we haven't done this before. Let's just go out early and rent a car, and we'll drive to the coast and drive up there. And so, and it turned out it was New Year's Day, and I have a cousin and we'll surprise my cousin in LA. So we did this on New Year's Eve, and New Year's Day at 9 o'clock in the morning, I knock on the door of my cousin's house. He opens the door and he takes one look at me, he slams the door back shut again.
What are you doing?
That could not be.
I must be dreaming.
But that was the spontaneity. So then we created a little game. If we got down to 30 degrees in Austin, we're not tolerating that. We're going to the airport, and I'd say it's going to be. She should have her bag packed and be by the door, and it didn't matter where we went. And she loved sitting in the airport and doing the people watching, particularly the people with little kids. She would imagine the parenting going on with everybody, and would have great conversations and see how this child is doing, see how this parent is reacting here, and it was a delightful change.
How did Eva decide to move to Maravia?
Well, she woke up one morning and decided that home ownership was too much of a burden. There was always the lawn or the fountain or the this or the that, and she just decided it was time to go to independent living and downsize. And she talked to the girls, and they knew the area and everything, so That's your story. You guys
Yeah.
kind of engineered that. I was oblivious and didn't know what was going on.
So we did. She said she wanted it, and we thought, okay, well, let's just go look at places first. And so we toured a few, and Maravia was one of them. And just like she did at Sun City and every other decision like that, she walked into Maravia, and then by the time we walked out, she said, that's it, that's where I want to go. And I said, oh, and are you sure that you don't want to look at, nope, Maravia is what I want. And so she put us to task of getting the house packed up and everything done, and we did, and I don't know, what, a month or a month and a half
It
or
moved
something.
pretty quickly once we decided. And, you know, we had looked at different opportunities for her over the years. Because our Aunt Marguerite was a little bit older, and so we had looked around the Austin area. So we'd done a couple tours, right, a few times. So by the time she walked into Maravia and she knew what she wanted, she just loved it. And she grew up in an apartment because Switzerland, Basel's like New York City or something. It's a very urban setting, and so she felt actually very at home and full circle to be back in a little apartment just like what she grew up in. It felt very cozy and safe to her, and she loved all of the people here. It was so interesting. I have voicemails from Mom, and pre-Maravia, it's a lot of, Shotzi, I need to talk to you. Shotzi, you haven't called me back. Well, Shotzi, when are we getting together? What's happening? And then after she moved into Maravia, she'd call and say, Shotzi, I don't even know what time it is. I just got back from breakfast. I have no time to talk to you because I'm going to go over here with me, Luann, and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm busy, you know? And she absolutely was thriving here. She really, it was a special time. It wasn't very long, but it had a really big impact on her. That she really, loved it. She was very happy. And when she was in the hospital, all she wanted to do was get back here. You know, was kind of the idea. So
She
yeah,
called this, we have this wonderful patio out here, and it was Renata's partner, Rick, showed me a little app where I could follow FlightWare, where I could follow all the airplanes in the sky. And the landing pattern comes right over the top of here. And so we'd be sitting out here and having our nightly happy hour, and every time an airplane would come over, oh, that's Alaska Air inbound from Seattle or Anchorage to Austin, whatever it was. And so we kept the travel thing up there, and she referred to this up here on the 8th floor with the view of the city skyline to the south. We are on a cruise ship on the 8th deck, and we never leave port. And we got shopping right below us. We got Dillard's over here, and we got Neiman Marcus over here, and Nordstrom's in between.
And she loved that. She loved the country life. She also loved the city life. And one of my favorite stories well, we were kids, we remember it, but that kind of shows that, and a good story of who she truly was, is she would work on the ranch all day, mugging out stalls, cleaning up whatever animal poop was around and needed to be taken care of, and this, that, and the other. And then she would come back into the house in the evening, she would take a shower, put on her beautiful sequins gown,
floor length,
yeah, my father would put on a suit. And one of the funniest times was people were always dropping off animals. So little baby whatevers that had to be taken care of. And so one day before they went to the opera, they were huge opera buffs, and this is where they would go. And once a month, once every other month.
Season ticket holders.
Downtown Houston, front row seats to the Jones Hall, to the opera. So someone had dropped off these little baby possums, and Mom was like, okay, she's in her gown, she's got to go. And she just went, well, they have to be fed, bottle fed every like 2 hours. So she took them, stuck them in her bra, she was well endowed, stuck them in her bra, went off to the opera, and during intermission of the opera, front row center, ball gowns, tuxedos, everything, she pulls out the babies, starts bottle feeding them, for the orchestra and everything, starts bottle feeding them, and then when they're done, sticks them back in, and then just continues on with the opera. And that was our mother.
That kind of says it all.
That really does. It's who she was.
Just, yeah, elegant, curious, irreverent, fearless,
everything.
beautiful. Love it.
If I can add on to that story, the way she would tell the story to me was that that when they would go out at intermission, that these little possums would start wiggling around, and her husband John would stand back and watch everybody's reaction as Mama's bra started leaping up and down.
And these were fancy people, you know, fancy people at Jones Hall.
Well-to-do
Yeah, and that
Houston.
orchestra seating.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's who she was, and we're sad to have lost her recently, but we also have such good stories and such good memories and a lifetime of what we had and what she shared with us, and hopefully what we get to pass on to future generations. Cause
And I had a 12-year relationship, 24/7,
All right.
365. And she only called me Craig about 4 or 5 times. The rest of the time was Shotzi. So I knew when I was in trouble if she called me Craig.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. That's it.
But I got a couple comments first, and then I'm going to start with Marilyn. I lost track of Marilyn. Marilyn's over there. So I'm going to say a few words. I'm going to hand it to Marilyn. She's going to pass it around. Would like any of you to share an anecdote that you would like. I know Jane's got something to say. And so I'm going to so we'll go around and have everybody speak for a moment, and then Erika's going to wrap it up. So this will just take a couple minutes. But I'll start out. 2 days ago we had a beautiful day. When I got in my car, it said 86 degrees. And I thought, well, I got a couple errands to run. So I went over to the UPS store. And Eva and I had a thing about, we like to travel a lot. And we always referred to her beautiful Lincoln Continental as the baby Bentley. In fact, she had a big purple hat that she'd wear and she'd ride in the back seat. And she bought me a little baseball cap that said "Driving Miss Daisy." And sometimes we'd pull up the restaurants that way. And it was all lots of fun. We didn't do it around local. We always did it when we were out of town. So we didn't want the word to get back. But anyhow, traveling to Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, places like that, we would always run into these little Bentley convertibles. Well, I've been here since August. I've never seen a Bentley around here. But I decided I got an errand to run over to the UPS store. So I went over and I pulled in. Guess who pulled in next to me? A baby blue Bentley convertible with the top down. And I said, well, thank you, Eva. I appreciate that. So then I thought, and I had just come from breakfast here, and I had seen me and Luann outside, and I said, hey, how about us doing dinner tonight? And she said, great, 5:45. So I got over there, and I'm sitting there, and ran my little errand at UPS, and I thought, it's going to get cold after today. This is a really beautiful day, and I would enjoy driving around the route. Even I used to love to go on long rides out into Hayes County, into the hill country, out on 71 and Hamilton Pool, and down around Belvedere, and down around Bee Cave Road, and back around, and wind up and have dinner at the Oasis. That was our thing. So I called Lady Luann and asked for a rain check on dinner, which she graciously accepted. And I took off. My car, I had my roof open and driving the usual routes that we went through. There's a little, on Hamilton Pool, there's a beautiful little subdivision called Belvedere that has all sorts of $1 million homes in it. For the last 8 or 9 years, we would drive through there and critique all the different construction going on. Well, we don't like this one. That was, well, this one, they should have done that one. That type of conversation, And then I wound up with the idea of going back to the Oasis. Coming back onto 620 and up to Comanche Road, I turned left, and as you're familiar with the Oasis, you know that there's a building there called the Treasury that Bo has all these antiques and collectibles. I think he hits every estate sale in Europe and brings them back. There's 3 stories of stuff, kind of dark and heavy, lots of dark leather and iron and so on. But I really felt Eva telling me to pull in and check out the Treasury. And so I did. And I pulled up the door, and the manager says, can I help? And I said, yes, I just want to walk through. He said, well, remember, there's three stories. Yes, I know. Been there, done that. It's probably been 5 years since we've been there. Anyhow, I walked in, and I didn't go 50 feet. With all this dark stuff there, you could hardly see in there. And here was something that I knew was the reason that Eva brought me there. So, there it is. So I saw this picture of the Oasis. So I said to the manager, how much do you want for that? Because I knew Eva had sent me here to pick it up. And he said, well, he says now, and I realized that there's no price tags on anything in there. And he says, now, he says, you know, that's an original. He says, that's a picture that was put on canvas and then it was hand painted over the top of that. He says, so I'm thinking 150, 125. My mind starts racing and I'm communicating with Miss Eva. And I say, well, I was thinking more like 25, maybe 50. And he says, well, I'll take 50. He says, now you want cash or do you want to do credit card? I said, well, I'll do credit card. He said, well, then I got to charge you sales tax. I said, well, okay, well, then I'll do cash. So I opened up my wallet and said, I only got $45 here. He said, sold. So this is going with me to Florida. This will be hanging on my wall. So thank you, Eva. And then I went and had dinner at the Oasis, and it's still 86 degrees, and then the clouds came in. By the time I left, it was down to 64, and now it's down to 33 today. So anyhow, with that, I want to find Marilyn. She's around here. Oh, here's Marilyn. And I want to hand it over to our wonderful, and on behalf of Eva, I want to thank everybody for giving her such a wonderful home the last few months.
Well, I feel very blessed because I got to visit with Eva in her very last days. And I'm wearing purple tonight because that's Eva's favorite color. And I have my blingy glass because she liked lots of bling. But as I was leaving, she grabbed my hand and she said, Marilyn, would you promise me something? And I said, well, Eva, I hate to say yes and then not be able to fulfill that promise. She said, okay, I'll tell you what I want you to do. She says, you know, I'm going to be cremated. And as they're putting the ashes in the jar, right before they lock the lid on, you slip a note in there to me to tell me where you buy all your clothes. We miss you, Eva.
I was next to Eva when she told Marilyn that story, so I can validate it's a true story. It's one of my favorites. Of course, I offered a note, but she said, no, Jane, Marilyn. Why? And the other favorite story I have, well, it has to do with Craig, so he can tell it if he wants it public. But anyway, it was just a treasure, a life event. I don't have the words to come to be part of Eva and vice versa. And when we knew of her passing, it just incorporated all of us who knew her. It was like a speechless experience that she was one with us and she was still with us. But even though her body was gone, and she's just a unique person of all the people I've ever met. Thank you, Eva.
Well, Eva and I just connected right away when we met. And she was one of the most fun people I've been with here, and we just laughed and laughed together over different things. But in my memory of Eva, I feel like she added some really spicy herbs to our meal here, and I miss her a lot.
Who's next? Come on up. Dolly.
I don't know if I can get up, but it was wonderful. I will stand up, and I'll do
In the
this.
back room too.
Sorry, stand up again. Okay, I'll do my best. I'm sorry. But we just loved Eva, and we didn't have her nearly long enough. But she was one of the group that jumped on the bus with us. We went wherever we could go, to the symphony, to whatever's happening. But she never wanted to miss anything, and we were always happy that she was with us. So I know that I have a little llama myself, and now it has a new name. Eva will be with me forever. But anyway, thank you all so much. And it's a beautiful thing, and she would be very proud of what you've done today.
Thanks, Dolly. Ellen. Come on up, who's next? Good morning.
Eva and Craig lived across the hall from us on the 8th floor. And met immediately, all embraced immediately. Craig wasn't there just yet, but he arrived shortly after. And when you'll remember, he said, Eva, we have a big tall wooden Indian by our door. And he said, Eva, our Indian's hungry. He wants to eat some of your goat. She said, that is not a goat. That is a llama. And you keep that Indian away from my llama. They had this running joke of the llama and the Indian. The Indian misses Eva.
My daughter-in-law has a real love of llamas. And so when I mentioned that to Eva one time, she thought that was just great. But a couple of weeks later, there was a package on my door. And inside that bag was a little llama and a little plate, a ceramic plate with a llama on it, and several other things that were for my daughter-in-law. My daughter-in-law loved llamas so much that when they had their first grandchild, instead of being called Nana or Mama, she was going to be called Llama Mama. And to this day she is. And thanks to Eva for adding to that. And in addition to that, my son now is called Papa Llama. Thank you, Eva.
Craig. Let's go over there to some of those folks.
My name is Grace, for whoever do not know me, and I am one of the Zest assistants here at Maravia. And I met Eva a few times, but one of the best times, and I've told Craig about this a lot, that even if you only met her a handful of times, you knew how spitfire she was. I mean, so feisty and so quick. And there was one time where she had come into my office to get her set up on the Life Loop account that we use here to look at all the activities going on and schedule things. And after we finished setting her up, we had a good time doing it, just because, I don't know, I was being cheeky and annoying. I said something like, well, Eva, this has been like the best part of my day. And she looks at me in the face and looks me up and down and goes, well, I certainly hope not. And I feel like in that moment, I knew who Eva was as a person, and I also felt like I could not BS her ever. Because she would call me out immediately. So it's definitely a little bit less fiery here in person, but as far as our memories go, I know that we've got a flame that will be ignited probably for the rest of our memories going forward. So thank you, Eva, for that.
Hi, my name is Dave Heath. My wife's back there. We had the privilege of visiting with both Eva and Craig to go to Georgetown. Now, we've been to Georgetown a lot of times, but I think the memorable moment was listening to the stories that both of them had. And knowing those stories are not only repeatable, they seem to have the same flavor. So just to test this out, my idea was to get both Erika and Renata and Craig to tell those stories for what I call StoryCorps. If you've listened to NPR, that's a way of recording these stories for life and putting them in the Library of Congress. So the objective of this video that's over here, if you want to watch it, you will be shocked or pleasantly surprised at how many good things they did, and especially with recognizing that both Renata and Erika got the privilege of living with her and exemplifying what Eva really was and is.
Thank you.
Hi, I think I've met everybody almost. I'm Erika, this is my sister Renata, and thank you so much. Mom loved her time here with you guys. She really, really did. And, you know, to be honest, before she moved here, things had slowed down a little bit for her, you know, through COVID and things. And she was a little bit sad, a little bit of that spark, you know, kind of dimmed a little bit. And the minute she moved in here, really the minute we took the tour, she knew. She was done immediately. She was like, that's it, I'm moving in. And Christ's like, wait, what? What's happening? Right? I mean, she just absolutely knew. And Mom was, like you said, just such an incredible person. She had so many aspects to her. She was a nurse. She was a wildlife rehabber. She was a dog breeder. She was on the rodeo, Houston Rodeo Committee. She had big goats. She was a llama breeder. She did all of the things. She was doing animal therapy with kids and hospitals before that was a thing that people even talked about. And when Mom came here, she really was inspired by all of you and all of your stories and your lives, and it just lit her right back up again. She was on fire, and I thank you with all my heart, because I saw my mom again. In the 3 months that she was here, she was just too busy. Every voicemail she left. You know, before that, I have all her voicemails, and before it was like, Shotzi, where are you? I must talk to you. Shotzi, we have business to take care of. Shotzi, and then after she moved in, Shotzi, I got no time to talk to you. I'm busy. I just got back from breakfast. It was 3 hours. I'm going to take a nap, and then we're going to the symphony. So I'll see you next week sometime. You know, she was really happy, and when she was in the hospital and sick for 3 months, she just wanted to come back. That's what she wanted to do, was come back to see you guys. And you guys were amazing and sent flowers and came to visit, and it was a wonderful comfort. She really felt this community in a deep way. So thank you all very much for all the love and giving us our Spark Mom back again. Thank you. Cheers. Cheers.
We have this wonderful video that David created. Where's David? Oh, there he is. It's set up right over here. We can push play on it, and you can wander in. You can watch a few minutes. David starts out, how did Miss Eva get from Switzerland to the United States? So that's how the story sort of begins, is her life over in Basel, Switzerland. And then through the eyes of her girls, Erika telling the story of coming home from school one day and finding an alligator in the kitchen sink, things of that nature. So it unfolds through there. Jane. The llama's going to stay here.
Llama's going to stay on the 8th floor, right outside the building.
That's right. Eileen's in charge of the llama.
I'm the caregiver.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming, and stay as long as you want, and we'll push play over there. And Grace has it all set up, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.